Mike Tannenbaum, the former general manager, former NFL executive, appears regularly on many of ESPN's studio programs, and one of the smarter NFL people I've ever been around. Mike joins us on the program. Mike, I was mentioning this prior to the commercial break. I thought one of the big winners yesterday was Tua Tagovailoa, because at the start of the season, it felt like the Dolphins said, if this doesn't go well, we still have some draft picks, and we could use that to take a quarterback here. And you're going to probably pick up his fourth year, his option here after this next season with what he's doing this year. What do you think the Dolphins said about Tua without saying anything yesterday?
Yeah, Dan, great to be with you. And I completely agree with you. It's interesting when you look at next year's first round, Seattle with Geno Smith playing really good, Philadelphia, who has Jalen Hurts playing well, and then Houston and Detroit. Those are the four teams that have 2 first-round picks. And now Miami is one of 5 teams that doesn't have a first-round pick. So I completely agree with you. I think they sent a massive message that, hey, Tua's our guy. And look, let's face it, when he's healthy, he's played well this year.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm them, I have to hold my breath a little bit in terms of, can he get through the rigors of a 17-game season? I would fortify the offensive line, but clearly when you look at winners and losers, I would put Tua at the very top.
Bradley Chubb going to the Dolphins, and I understand Denver saying, all right, we're not going anywhere. We're not going to pay this guy $100 million, I guess, moving forward. Give me the logic of what Denver did and what Miami is doing.
I don't like it for Denver because it sends the wrong message, which is, hey, we acquired Russell Wilson. We should be trying to win as many games as possible. It sends a terrible message that, hey, even though we may have hit on Baron Browning and certainly Randy Gregory was a big offseason acquisition, Bradley Chubb's a young, really productive pass rusher when he's healthy. So I want to keep those players, even if I have to franchise them. Now, look, I'm sure what they're saying is we need a first-round pick to help with the offensive line or other ways to help Russell. But that's San Francisco's first rounder. And Dan, they're going to be playing meaningful games. I wouldn't be surprised if San Francisco's first round pick was in the lower 20s. And for Miami, I like it from a standpoint of, even though you have Jalen Phillips and Emmanuel Agba, you've really struggled getting to the quarterback. And for us to get to where we want to go, we got to beat Josh Allen. We got to beat Patrick Mahomes. And if we were drafting in next year's first round, as you mentioned, if we're good on Tua, pass rush is the likely place they would have gone anyway.
Give me the move that happened or didn't happen that will have the biggest impact on the end of the end of the season.
Dan, it's easy for me. I mean, it's shocking that we're talking about an NFC North team adding a wide receiver, and it's not the Green Bay Packers. One of the things, like when you have the privilege of running an NFL team, you have to have the wherewithal to say, hey, our plan is firmly etched in pencil, and we're going to move on from Devontae Adams. We're going to take Christian Watson in the second round, Romeo Doubs in the fourth, but we have an all-time great quarterback right now who's much closer to the end than the beginning. So go get Jerry Jeudy, go get Chase Claypool, go help him win right now. And the fact that the Packers didn't, to me, is very meaningful, where, look, the Bears aren't going to win the division, but Claypool is going to be a good player. That helps Justin Fields. And then you've got Minnesota sitting there with 6 wins, Dan, and they add a good player in TJ Hawkinson.
But I don't understand, if it's obvious to us, Mike, then why didn't the Packers make a move?
Well, the word on the street was they were interested in Claypool, and maybe they just felt it wasn't worth a second-round pick. And look, I've been there with Brett Favre. I've been there with Vinny Testaverde, with quarterbacks at the end of their career. And when those windows are closing, you want to do everything within reason. And I think what happens sometimes in Green Bay is you can lack a sense of urgency because you don't have an owner. And look, they've done a great job. Matt LaFleur, Brian Gutekunst, they have a really good record. I just think they made a mistake by not doing what a lot of other teams did yesterday, which is to help them coming down the stretch here. Now, with that said, Dan, if they come out of this with Odell Beckham Jr. in the next week or two, then we'll give them credit then. But that's the one player that's out there of consequence that can help them in a meaningful way.
Chase Claypool frustrates me because I think he looks the part. He doesn't always play the part. Why is that?
A lot of young receivers come out of college exactly that way. They're not great route runners. They're also very young, somewhat immature. He's a guy that, let's face it, had some growing up to do, which I think he was starting to do that. I think there was some humility that guys like George Pickens were just getting more playing time. And sometimes when you go to the next team, you benefit. Like I know when we acquired Santonio Holmes, that was humbling for him to get traded from the Steelers to the Jets. So it could be an opportunity. And really, what I would tell him if I was a GM of the Bears, Dan, is very simple. Like the slate is completely clean. You can grow in a meaningful way with Justin Fields for the next 10 years and make a lot of money right here in Chicago. Or in a year and a half, you could be on your third team in 3 years and be a journeyman. So the pen is in your hand. What kind of career do you want to have?
And I couldn't help but think of Laramie Tunsil yesterday because of the draft capital that you got for Laramie Tunsil. And that turns out that you're able to use it for Bradley Chubb, Jalen Waddle, and Tyreek Hill. That seems like a one-sided trade if you looked at, a lot of times we look at trades, Mike, and we go, oh, man, they got the better end of this because we look at what happens immediately. You got to play the long game sometimes where you go, oh, that's right, they got those draft picks from the Texans for Laramie Tunsil.
And that's one of the reasons, candidly, Bill O'Brien's not in Houston anymore. Bill O'Brien may be a good coach, but he turned out not to be a good GM, with the Tunsil trade, DeAndre Hopkins, amongst the others. So, credit Miami for doing that. And when you look at even the trade back, where they traded back with the 49ers when San Francisco traded up last year for Trey Lance, they came out of that with both Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill. So they have some great players in Hill, Waddle, and Chubb. The question for Miami now is, can Tua stay at that level consistently and healthy? Can Chubb stay healthy, which he's struggled with? And now we got these pieces. Can we close the gap meaningfully on Kansas City and Buffalo?
And I'll go back to the deals that were made by two other teams in the NFC North. If you would have said two teams are going to pick up receivers in the NFC North, I know the Lions aren't going to be one of those. You would have assumed that it would be the Packers and the Vikings, and the fact that it's the Bears and the Vikings. And T.J. Hawkinson, for a team that's had no production from their tight ends, I thought this was a sneaky great pickup for them.
Absolutely. And TJ Hawkinson, Dan, he's a really good blocker. Like he could capture the edge. And by the way, you got Dalvin Cook, so you could close games out. So that was a really good move. And by the way, like I've been in Brian Gutekunst's shoes, the GM of the Packers. Like he's walking into that building today and he's got 53 guys looking at him like, what's going on here? Like what didn't you do? Like we want to win right now. And look, you got to do things within reason and be judicious. We get that, Dan. But
what happens when Rodgers passes Brian Gutekunst in the hallway?
It's not good. And I got to tell you, I had great relationships with like some of the veterans, like the Bart Scotts of the world. I remember we once cut a player, Jericho Cotry, who was a B player and an A+ person. And we moved on from him because we needed the spot. And I had like a line in my office, like, you screwed up, Mike. You can't do that. This guy solves problems for you. And I got to imagine today, Aaron Rodgers is pounding down that door. Like, what didn't you get done? Like, why do you think we're a better team today? We know Watson can't stay healthy. Dobbs has been really inconsistent. Why not go get a guy like Claypool or Judy or Brandon Cooks? Like, why didn't you do that? Like, it sends a horrible message. Now, with that said, the one thing they could do is go get Odell Beckham because, look, I know he's coming off of the ACL. He's not ready yet. But when he played in the last game we saw, Dan, including Aaron Donald, he was the best player on the field, and he just turned 30. So I think there's still good football left in him, and that's exactly the type of player they need.
Yeah, but he makes me nervous. That's 2 ACLs, Mike. And coming from somebody who's had 7 knee surgeries, and I'm just trying to walk, let alone he's going out there trying to play after his second one. And I know a lot of people hold out a hope, and he's clickbait. They love to follow the stories. Speaking of clickbait, the Cowboys, I guess, were all in on Brendan Cooks to the very end and then didn't pull the trigger. I know he's expensive. He's productive. How surprised were you the Cowboys didn't make this move?
Really surprised. They have a championship defense. Outside of Aaron Donald, I think Micah Parsons may be the best non-quarterback on the planet. He is that transcendent. And when you have a window to win now, look, your quarterback, Dan, we could debate, is Dak the 6th best quarterback, the 12th? It really doesn't matter. He's a good quarterback with a great defense. And if you could get one more element on the perimeter that could really help guys like CeeDee Lamb, and look, like Dalton Schultz is good, not great, but you do have Tony Pollard. They are missing. Like, I think if they could have the one move back, moving on from Cooper was really a mistake because that's really what they need. They need somebody on the outside that can make plays. And that's what Brandon Cooks can do. He can take the top off of coverage. He can move the safety over. It opens up the middle of the field. And I think in hindsight, they wouldn't have cut Cooper, who was making just $20 million, which is reasonable in this day and age. And I would have extended a little bit to make sure that we at least got in Cooks.
Talking to Mike Tannenbaum, the ESPN NFL front office insider. Yeah, trying to figure out what the Cowboys were doing. And I thought, Jerry loves shiny toys and you bring in another offensive weapon. But let me go back to Micah Parsons. You guys spend so much time studying who these, draft eligible players are. He's a middle linebacker at Penn State, had tremendous athleticism. I go back to Aaron Donald. Like some of these guys where you go, how did people miss on them?
So Donald's easy. He isn't tall, and he plays a position that, let's face it, isn't a premier position. I mean, he wasn't like a pass rushing defensive end. So that's why he wasn't a top 5 pick. There was real concerns that he was a little bit short, and coming out, he wasn't overly big. Okay. Obviously, that was a massive mistake. Parsons is really interesting because, Dan, it was a negative a little bit coming out. He was a little bit positionless from a standpoint. You're right. He was an off-the-ball middle linebacker at Penn State. So you actually couldn't see what he could do great, which was rush the passer. And sometimes that happens. Like players play in different positions in college. And I think, look, he's a great player, but I give Dan Quinn a lot of credit because what he's been able to do is move him around, and it just puts him in, he gets him in a lot of one-on-one situations, and he's unblockable. And look, they got DeMarcus Lawrence last year. They also had Randy Gregory. But when you get Parsons one-on-one, he's hard to block. And you didn't see that a lot at Penn State. You saw him dropping. You could see him run. You could see the athleticism. But now what we're seeing, it translates to a great pass rusher as well.
I thought that they would use him in college like they did LeVar Arrington, where you just say, hey, we're going to line him up. You try to find him because he's coming after you. And that's where – and I did have a source who said if somebody's willing to take the chance, Micah Parsons is the best defensive player in the draft. And
100, yep.
and we've seen that. I mean, he should be up there in the MVP race.
Dan, if we owned a team and it wasn't a quarterback, I'm hard pressed to think he wouldn't be the guy we would start our team with.
Oh, I like that. Hey, it's great to talk to you as always, and thanks for joining us, Mike.
Dan, really appreciate it, and hope those 7D surgeries serve you well.
Yeah. You would take me off the board. I had way too many red flags, not just my knees, by the way, but you would have taken me off the board.
But Dan, you got great intangibles, and you can help the team a lot other way.
Thank you, buddy. That's Mike Tannenbaum, the ESPN NFL front office insider, former NFL executive.